What's going on, guys? Daniel Debrock, Director of Education Curriculum at Kabuki Strength, and today I'm going to be answering the question, should you stick to your diet during the holidays? This is a question I get fairly often and wanted to make a video to, one, provide a little bit of context to whether or not you actually should stick to your diet. Two, if you do decide to stick to your diet, what are some important considerations that you need to understand prior to actually going into these holiday events? And three, what do you need to do in order to get the most out of your holiday while simultaneously enjoying the time with friends and family without completely disrupting your diet? So let's dive into it. Now, I think the first and really important consideration is understanding what your goals and priorities actually are. Are you a bodybuilder in contest prep? Are you a competitive athlete who needs to make weight? Is this a time-sensitive goal? If yes, then there are certain times and periods, even throughout the holidays, where you just need to bite the bullet and stick to your diet. However, if you're not a bodybuilder in contest prep or some sort of competitive athlete that needs to meet a weight restriction like an MMA fighter, powerlifter, whatever, then you have a lot more flexibility, and that's going to be what we're going to explore and going to be the main focus of this video. So first, I think it's important to understand a little bit about how adherence works and long-term dietary success works, so that some of the practical advice we give is going to have a lot more utility in your own experience. So first, let's talk about adherence. When we're talking about adherence to nutrition, there are a couple things that really predict long-term success. The first is going to be what's called flexible restraint. So anytime you demonstrate dietary restraint, there is going to be you're going to be able to say yes to certain things, but then also demonstrate a level of control and say no to other things. Now, this can be very good and is actually necessary, obviously, when you're dieting. However, we can take this to the extreme, and this is where we go from flexible, which is more healthy type of restraint, to a rigid type of restraint. Now, rigid restraint is characterized by dichotomous type thinking. So dichotomous thinking is looking at things in opposition. So foods are good or bad. You are a good or bad person. You are either weak or you're strong. Things like that. And this is a very problematic mentality to approach diet from, because it tends to push people to the extremes. If you're doing, great with your diet and then you have like a cookie or something like that because you're out with some friends, well, now all of a sudden you're a bad person and you're morally worthless and so on and so forth. And this is obviously ridiculous, but these are genuinely some of the feelings and thoughts and characteristics people tend to internalize when they're dieting. And these are primarily adopted by individuals who maintain a dichotomous style of thinking and very rigid approaches. So they are associated. It's not to suggest that if you are someone who's very regimented in your diet, that you're going to also have a lot of these negative side effects. It's just something that is correlated. So it's something to be mindful of. And if these are things you're currently struggling with, then it's definitely worth noting, and that should be considered when determining which approach is going to be most appropriate for you, especially during the holiday season. Now, when we come to adherence as well, we need to look at disinhibition. So these would be periods where maybe you're doing really well in your diet and then all of a sudden you get disinhibited, which is a great example of this might be you're great Monday through Friday, and then over the weekend when you go with your friends, you just completely lose control, you start binging, or you just have way too many drinks or eat out way too much off plan. So these can be problematic. So understanding that a more flexible approach is going to actually lend itself to better adherence over time. You need to make sure that when you are looking at your diet, it's kind of viewed from the lens of a long-term success perspective. Okay, so we're not making short-term decisions. We're developing a lifestyle that's going to sustain us for a very long period of time. So when you're looking at diet, those are some things to consider. When it comes to actually going out to different events, there's typically going to be a lot of different events, so it's important to actually set some ground rules and guidelines to help you get through these different social events or work engagements or whatever it might be. Now, there's a big difference between planned versus unplanned dietary breaks. Unplanned dietary breaks can actually be pretty destructive to your sort of psychology, right? So, for instance, going back to the example I gave previously, if you're great throughout the week, but then over the weekend, you completely go off the rails and just eat a bunch of crappy food, or even if you don't go completely off the rails, even if you just veer off your diet a little bit, if it's unplanned, you are now a failure. So rather than just say, I'm not going to do that, why don't we create some parameters and guidelines around what eating out might actually look like, so that not only is it planned, but you're actually going to make sure that you're doing it in a way where you can enjoy yourself while simultaneously sticking to your diet. Okay, now when I say sticking to your diet, we're talking about sticking to your diet within the new parameters that are temporarily imposed while you're eating out at this social event. So, what might that look like? It might actually be pretty helpful to discuss your goals with your family, friends, coworkers, whatever. I know some people are reluctant to do this, but honestly, it baffles me as why that might be the case. You have goals. They're important to you. If they're important to you, they're going to also be important to the people that you care about, to the people that you're close with, your family, friends, and other people. I'm trying to build muscle. I'm trying to make a certain weight class for competition, or whatever the heck your goals might be. Have that conversation. Just sit down, have a heart-to-heart with each person and say, hey, these are goals that are really important to me. I'm working really hard, and to be honest, it's actually pretty tough. It's a lot tougher than I thought, and I really want to make sure that I'm still enjoying my social life and I have a great balance. I want to be able to spend time with you, but one of the really big things that's concerning me, and it's actually a pretty big point of stress, is what I'm going to do when I'm out. Because a lot of the times I know you guys like to drink, or I know you guys like to eat out, and you're not as concerned with, like, we don't have the same goals. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that, so that you don't necessarily pressure me inadvertently into kind of adopting similar eating or drinking habits as you guys. Not saying that those things are bad, it's just that they don't necessarily align with my goals, and I would really appreciate it if you guys could just offer some support. People will want to help you. If someone asked me that, I'd be like, fuck yeah, I want to help you out because I care about you. And your friends and family are most likely going to be incredibly receptive to that if you actually take the time out to have that one-on-one conversation with them. So, cannot stress how important that is. But now let's get into the actual process of what you might do. So specific tactics, okay, in addition to having that conversation. Well, first of all, if you're going to go and eat out, you can set some parameters around what it is that you're going to eat. So first, you might say, okay, I can eat whatever I want. However, I have to fill up on fruits and veggies and lean proteins first. I have to make sure I check off those boxes, okay? So you're still, if you're tracking macros, make sure you hit your protein, veggies, and your fruit before anything else. You're gonna be much less likely to go as far off trail as you would if you were hungry, or if you didn't consume a lot of those really satiating, very low calorie food options first, right? So even if you go off the rails, you're not going to go do anywhere near as much damage as if you hadn't preemptively assumed that you're probably going to do that and eaten those foods in advance, okay? So that's one really effective tactic. Another effective tactic, and this one can go either way, right? It really depends. So you can kind of do like a quote-unquote intermittent fasting approach, where maybe you only have like one small meal prior to going out with your friends and having dinner. Now, it's really important to understand that if you're super hungry going out with friends, that might actually spur on more cravings than you would like, okay? So even though you have a greater calorie allotment that you can kind of mess around with, it might also make you more hungry, which might make you a little bit more prone to making, quote unquote, worse decisions, or let's just say less productive decisions based on your goals. So that one's kind of got a little bit, a little bit of a different trade-offs, right? So there's two sides to that coin. Now, for me personally, I find that approach to be really effective, and it works really well. For other people, I know they're more prone to cravings, so they might not want to do that because it's not going to be as appropriate for them. Another thing you want to do is stay hydrated. A lot of the times people can mistake thirst for hunger, right? Now, it's not to say that those are necessarily the same signals. However, if you're thirsty, your body will generally want to consume something. And a lot of the times people, especially if they're not necessarily well in tune with some of those signals, might misinterpret thirst for hunger. So make sure that you are well hydrated throughout the day. And one additional trick that you can use is also making sure that you drink about half a liter or even a full liter before you actually eat these foods out with your friends and family. That's typically going to increase the actual content of the gut, make you feel a little bit more satiated, and reduce the likelihood of overeating, right? So again, these are all just tactics that you can combine or swap in and out based on your own judgment. Lastly, prior to eating any sort of, prior to going out, set an actual plan for yourself. Set a target, right? Like an objective. Basically, it's going to be pretty similar to when you go into the gym and you say, okay, the goal today is I want to squat this much for this many reps, right? You kind of have a rough approximation of what you're going to be doing when you head into the gym that day because you have an actual written program laid out for you. When it comes to going out to eat, there are good times, there's a very good case to be made for actually setting some specific parameters and a very clear criteria of what you're going to do. So maybe you say, hey, I'm going to have drinks and desserts and I'm going to eat whatever I want, but I'm only limited to one of each. So I can only have one appetizer, I can only have one dessert, and I can only have one drink. So I better make it really good and I better enjoy it, right? Now, that's just a hypothetical example. Whether or not that would necessarily even be a super effective strategy is, kind of up for debate. But the point is that you're setting out specific parameters that are determining your success and determining whether or not you were unsuccessful. That's very important. If you don't have any sort of guidelines, then you don't really know how to evaluate yourself. And especially when you're in that position where you want to go off your diet, where you want to have the drinks and all that stuff, if you don't have clear guidelines, it's going to be very easy to talk your way out of it and be like, it says this, but I can kind of be more flexible and blah, blah, blah. You want to make sure you're holding yourself accountable and actually sticking to your diet while still being able to have some flexibility and enjoy your time with your friends and family. Again, folks, thank you so much for watching the video. Hopefully you guys got some value from it and you can take some of these tactics and implement them while you guys are out at different social events during the holidays, and you can actually determine whether or not a diet's even going to be appropriate for you. Sometimes you might just be better off going ahead and going out and not even having any plans. Right? Sometimes you might be better off actually sticking to your diet and having some sort of a structured plan. This is highly individual and it's really going to depend on what you want to get out of your diet, your results, and how committed you are to these processes and what level of trade-offs you're looking to make. So again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys on the next video.